This poor girl made an unexpected request to a millionaire. "Uncle, let me shine your shoes for $1." The millionaire was shocked and tries to find out more about the girl's life. He's shocked when he finds out about her miserable life, and what he does next is shocking. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The sun beat mercilessly on the cracked sidewalk downtown as Arthur adjusted his tie for the third time that morning. Sweat trickled down his forehead as he checked the Rolex on his wrist. He was late for the most important meeting of the month. His Italian leather shoes echoed against the concrete as he hurried along, dodging street vendors and passers-by crowding the narrow sidewalks. The custom-tailored beige suit, which normally fit him like a glove, now felt suffocating. It wasn't just the heat. There was something else weighing on his shoulders that morning. Maybe it was the numbers that weren't adding up in the latest report, or the emptiness he found every night when he returned to his penthouse in the city's most exclusive neighborhood. That's when he heard a voice, so soft it almost got lost in the street noise, but with an urgency that made him stop. "Mister, can I shine your shoes for $1?" Arthur looked down and met a pair of brown eyes staring up at him with disarming intensity. It was a little girl, no more than 5 or 6 years old. Her hands held a worn shoe brush, and her fingernails were darkened with polish and dirt. She wore shorts that were too big for her skinny body, and a t-shirt that must have once been white. His first impulse was to keep walking. He was already late, and this wasn't the first kid he'd seen working on the streets. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the professional way she held the brush, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for someone her age. Or maybe it was the way she held her posture straight, trying to look older than she was. "What's your name?" he heard himself asking, surprising himself. "Brianna," she replied without hesitation. "And why are you out here alone, Brianna?" The girl swallowed hard before answering, and for a moment her mask of professionalism faltered. "It's just that my little brother hasn't eaten today, and neither has my grandma." The words hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. He looked around as if searching for an escape, an excuse to go on his way. The meeting was important. Millions were at stake. But when his eyes returned to Brianna, he saw something that made him forget all his appointments. There was a yellowing bruise on her knee, barely hidden by the hem of her shorts. And in her eyes, far beyond the apparent hunger, was a kind of determination he recognized. It was the same look he saw in the mirror every morning, the look of someone carrying responsibilities too big for their shoulders. "Have you had breakfast today?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. Brianna shook her head, still holding the brush as if her life depended on it. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand without much thought to what he was doing. The small hand that took his was rough and cold despite the heat. Arthur led her to a nearby diner, a simple but clean establishment where the air conditioning hummed lazily. The waitress looked at them suspiciously when they entered, him in his expensive suit, her in ragged clothes. "What do you want to eat?" he asked Brianna, who stared in wonder at the laminated menu. "Can I have anything?" "Anything." She ordered a grilled cheese sandwich and a hot chocolate. She ate as if she hadn't seen food in days, but maintaining a dignity that broke Arthur's heart. As she ate, he watched her, noticing details he hadn't noticed before, the messy hair, the dirt smudges on her neck, the way her eyes constantly scanned the room, as if she expected someone to come and take her food away at any moment. "You said you have a brother?" he asked when she finished. "Yes, it's Mikey. He's 3 years old," she replied, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "He stays with Grandma Carol when I come to work." "And where do you live?" Brianna hesitated for the first time since he met her. Her eyes met his, as if assessing whether she could trust this well-dressed stranger who had given her food. "It's far from here," she said finally, "near the creek past the market." Arthur knew the area. It was one of the poorest areas of the city, with makeshift shacks teetering precariously on the banks of a polluted creek. His stomach clenched at the thought of a 5-year-old making that journey alone every day. "Does your grandmother know you're here?" Brianna's face contorted into an expression that didn't match her age, a mixture of worry and resignation. "Grandma Carol doesn't know much anymore," she whispered. "Sometimes she even forgets who I am. And she can't walk right anymore." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Arthur looked at his watch. The meeting had started 40 minutes ago. His cell phone vibrated insistently in his suit pocket, but for the first time in years he didn't care. "Can you show me where you live?" The words came out of his mouth before he could think better of it. A voice in his head screamed that it was crazy, that he had responsibilities, commitments, a company to run. But another voice, one he hadn't heard in a long time, whispered that none of that mattered at that moment. Brianna studied him for a long moment before nodding. She got up from the chair with the same quiet dignity with which she had eaten, carefully picking up her shoe-shine box. As he paid the bill, Arthur noticed that his hands trembled slightly. Something was changing. Inside him, something he couldn't name. And when they left the diner, with Brianna leading the way through the increasingly narrow and deteriorated streets, he had the strange feeling that he was about to discover something that would change his life forever. The path to Brianna's home seemed to transport Arthur to another reality. The paved streets gave way to dirt alleys, where the smell of open sewage mixed with the aroma of food being prepared on makeshift stoves. The beige suit, which once represented status and power, now made him feel out of place and vulnerable. Brianna walked ahead of him with confident steps, as if every loose stone, every puddle of mud, every stray dog that crossed her path was part of a choreography long rehearsed. From time to time, she looked back, as if to make sure he was still following her. "It's right over there," she said, pointing to a cluster of shacks that teetered precariously on the edge of the creek. Arthur's heart tightened as she led him. Through a narrow passage between two buildings, the floor was damp and slippery, and the air had a strong smell of mold. Finally, they stopped in front of a structure that could barely be called a house. It was a small shack, built with pieces of wood and rusty zinc sheets. Through the cracks in the walls, it was possible to see the dark interior. Brianna pushed open a makeshift door that creaked in protest. "Grandma? Mikey, I'm home!" she called, her voice echoing in the cramped space. The inside of the shack was even worse than Arthur imagined. A single room served as a bedroom, living room, and kitchen. On the floor, an old, stained mattress took up almost the entire space. On it, an elderly lady was lying, covered by a thin, faded sheet. "Brianna, is that you, dear?" The lady's voice was weak and trembling. "Yes, Grandma Carol. I brought a visitor." A little boy, who was sitting on the floor playing with bottle caps, looked up when he heard his sister's voice. His face lit up with a smile that showed missing baby teeth. "Sissy!" he shouted, running to hug Brianna's legs. Arthur remained standing at the entrance, feeling like an intruder in that environment of poverty and love. He watched as Brianna gently pushed her brother away so she could approach her grandmother. The girl took a piece of bread from her shoe-shine box. She must have saved it from the diner, and began to break it into small pieces. "Grandma, I managed to bring food today," she said, helping the lady sit up. It was then that Arthur could see Carol's face better. Her eyes, blurred by age and illness, didn't seem to be able to focus on anything specific. Her hands trembled as she tried to hold the pieces of bread that her granddaughter offered her. "Who's there?" Carol asked, turning her face in the direction where Arthur was. "It's a good man, Grandma. He gave me food today," Brianna replied, giving Arthur a hesitant look. Carol tried to smile, but the effort seemed to drain her strength. "God bless you, young man. It's not every day that someone looks at us." The lady's words hit Arthur like a physical blow. How many times had he passed by people like them without really seeing them? How many Briannas had he ignored in his daily race for success? "Do you need any medication?" he heard himself asking, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Oh, son, there are so many that I don't even know anymore," Carol replied with a tired sigh. "But don't worry about it. We've lived like this for so long." Mikey, who had remained quiet until then, approached Arthur with childish curiosity. His big eyes studied the well-dressed stranger with a mixture of fascination and distrust. "Hardened, to steam scene. Are you rich?" the boy asked abruptly. "Mikey!" Brianna reprimanded him, but Arthur raised his hand in a reassuring gesture. "Yes, I have money," he replied honestly, bending down to be at the boy's height. "But today your sister taught me that there are more important things than money." A violent coughing fit from Carol interrupted the moment. Brianna rushed to help her grandmother, holding her by the shoulders as her frail body shook. When the cough finally passed, the lady was pale and gasping for air. "It's nothing," she murmured, trying to reassure her grandchildren. "I just need to rest a little." But Arthur could see the fear in Brianna's eyes. It was the fear of someone who had already lost too much and knew that she could lose even more. She adjusted the worn pillow under her grandmother's head with a delicacy that broke his heart. "Do you have clean water?" he asked, noticing a pile of empty plastic bottles in a corner. Brianna shook her head. "The street tap only works early, in the morning. Sometimes when it rains a lot, the creek rises and the water gets dirty." Arthur looked at the roof of the shack, noticing the several leaks marked by dark stains. The smell of mold was stronger near the walls, and he could see signs of seepage everywhere. "And when it rains, what do you do?" "We put some basins," Brianna replied simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "But sometimes it's not enough. Grandma gets wet, and then her cough gets worse." At that moment, something inside Arthur broke definitively. His whole world of numbers, contracts, and important meetings seemed insignificant in the face of the raw reality he had before him. There were 3 lives fighting to survive, 3 hearts beating against all odds. His cell phone vibrated again, in his pocket. This time, he took it out and looked at the screen. 47 missed calls, 23 unread messages. On any other day, this would have been cause for panic. Today, it just seemed like a distant noise. "Brianna," he called, his voice firm but gentle. "I need to leave now, but I'll be back tomorrow, I promise." The girl's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Really? And I'm going to bring some things you need." As he said goodbye, Arthur felt something tugging at the hem of his jacket. It was Mikey, with his big, hopeful eyes. "Bring chocolate?" the boy asked timidly. "Mikey!" Brianna scolded again, but there was a smile on her lips. "I will," Arthur promised, tousling the boy's hair. "And other things too." When he left the shack, the sun was already setting, painting the sky in orange tones that contrasted cruelly with the misery around. Arthur walked back to the center of the city like a man in a trance, his suit now stained with mud and his Italian shoes ruined. But he barely noticed it. His mind was busy doing calculations, not the cold numbers of financial reports, but calculations of a different kind. How much would a new mattress cost? Medication? Food for a month? How could he help that family without hurting their pride? And above all, a question echoed in his mind. How had he lived so long without really seeing what was right before his eyes? What he didn't know, as he walked through the city that now seemed strangely different, was that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. And that first visit to the shack by the creek would be just the beginning of a journey that would transform not only 3 lives, but his own soul. That night, Arthur couldn't sleep. Sitting on the porch of his luxurious penthouse with a cup of untouched coffee in his hands, he watched the city lights without really seeing them. His mind was fixed on the images of the day. Brianna's courageous smile, Mikey's hopeful eyes, Carol's tired face. The board of directors of his company had sent dozens of messages demanding explanations about his absence from the crucial meeting. Important contracts awaited his signature, but for the first time in 30 years of his career, none of that seemed important. When the sun rose, he was already on his feet. He exchanged the suit for simpler clothes, jeans and a polo shirt. Before leaving, he filled the trunk of the car with the purchases he had made the night before: new mattresses, blankets, food, medicines, hygiene products. He had spent hours researching on the internet about the most common medicines for elderly people with respiratory problems. Traffic was still calm when he arrived in the creek area. Some women were already washing clothes in the public taps, and the smell of coffee mixed with the smoke from the makeshift stoves. He found Brianna on the same corner as the day before, already with her shoe-shine box. "You really came back," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with surprise and joy. I promised, didn't I?" he replied, feeling a strange warmth in his chest when he saw her smile. "Come with me. I brought some things for you." When he opened the trunk, Brianna's eyes widened. "Is all this for folks?" "Yes, but I'll need help carrying them." As they walked towards the shack, Brianna recounted that Grandma Carol had taken a turn for the worse during the night. Her cough had gotten worse, and she could barely breathe. The girl had stayed awake, sitting beside her grandmother, wetting her lips with water. The shack seemed even smaller in the morning light. Mikey was sitting on the floor, silently playing with his bottle caps, while Carol slept a restless sleep on the old mattress. "I brought medicine for your grandmother," Arthur said softly, not wanting to wake her. "And other things too." With the help of some neighbors who approached curiously, they began to organize the donations. The old mattress was replaced by 3 new ones, one for each of them. Arthur had also brought a small 2-burner stove and some basic pots and pans. "Now you can make hot food," he explained, showing Brianna how to light the stove safely. Mikey was overjoyed when he saw the chocolate bars that Arthur had brought especially for him. But it was Carol's reaction when she woke up and saw the changes in the shack that most touched the businessman's heart. "Son," she called, her voice weak but clear. "Come here." Arthur approached, kneeling beside the new mattress where she now rested. "Why are you doing this for us?" she asked, her blurred eyes trying to focus on him. "Because your granddaughter taught me a very important lesson yesterday," he replied honestly. "She showed me that I've been living with my eyes closed." Carol coughed, a raspy sound that seemed to tear her chest. Arthur quickly grabbed the medications he had brought. "I brought some medicine. You need to start taking care of yourself." "Medicine is expensive," she protested weakly. "Don't worry about that now. Let's take care of you first." While helping Carol take her medication, Arthur watched Brianna organizing the groceries with a surprising efficiency for someone so young. She separated the food, carefully storing it in plastic bags to protect it from moisture. "Brianna," he called when he finished medicating Carol, "you won't have to work on the streets anymore." The girl stopped what she was doing, her small hands frozen in the air. "But how are we going to buy food?" "I'm going to help you for a while, until your grandmother gets better, but with one condition." "What?" she asked suspiciously. "You need to go back to school. Kids should be in school, not working on the streets." Brianna's eyes filled with tears. "I really wanted to go back to school, but I don't have a uniform or supplies." "That's not a problem. We'll figure it all out." At that moment, a loud clap of thunder made everyone jump. The sky, which had been clear a moment ago, had darkened rapidly. Heavy raindrops began to fall, drumming on the tin roof. "The leaks!" Brianna shouted, running to grab the basins. Arthur watched helplessly as water began to stream down the walls of the shack. The floor quickly became wet, and a stream of dirty water began to enter under the makeshift door. "Does this happen every time it rains?" he asked, helping to position the basins. "Yes," Brianna replied, her voice trembling slightly. "But the worst is when the creek rises." As if in answer to her words, an eerie sound of running water began to grow outside. Arthur ran to the door and his heart froze. The creek, normally a trickle of dirty water, was turning into a raging torrent. "We need to get out of here," he said, the urgency clear in his voice. "Now!" But when he turned to help Carol get up, he realized it wouldn't be so simple. The elderly woman could barely move, and the rain was getting heavier and heavier. The sound of the water rising was deafening now. Through the cracks in the walls, Arthur could see that the creek level was dangerously high. Other residents of the area were already running, carrying what they could save. It was then that he made a decision that would forever change the course of those lives. He took his cell phone out of his pocket and made a quick call. "I need an ambulance, urgent." While they waited, he began to gather the most important documents and belongings into a plastic bag. Brianna helped him silently, while Mikey, frightened by the storm, clung to his sister's legs. "I'm going to take you to a safe place," Arthur promised, his voice firm despite the chaos around him. "Do you trust me?" Brianna looked at her grandmother, then at her brother, and finally at Arthur. In her eyes there was a mixture of fear and hope. "We trust you," she replied for everyone. The sound of the ambulance siren cut through the noise of the storm, but as the paramedics approached to help transport Carol, no one could predict that that rainy night would be just the beginning of an even greater ordeal that awaited them. The ambulance snaked through the narrow streets in the torrential rain, with Arthur following close behind in his car. In the back seat, Brianna hugged Mikey tightly, both soaked and shivering. The boy cried softly, calling for his grandmother, while his sister tried to calm him, even though she was visibly frightened. Through the rearview mirror, Arthur could see the ambulance lights cutting through the darkness of the storm. Inside it, Carol was being cared for by the paramedics. The elderly woman could barely breathe when they took her out of the shack. Her skin had taken on a bluish hue that made Arthur's heart clench. "Where are they taking Grandma?" Brianna asked, her small voice barely overcoming the sound of the rain on the car windows. "To St. Clair's Hospital," Arthur replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "It's the best hospital in the city. Your grandmother will receive all the necessary care there." "But we don't have money for the hospital," the girl whispered, the fear evident in her voice. "Don't worry about that now, Brianna. I'll take care of everything." In the back seat, Mikey had finally stopped crying, overcome by exhaustion. His small head rested in his sister's lap, who stroked his wet hair with a protective gesture that broke Arthur's heart. When they arrived at the hospital, a team was already waiting at the entrance to the emergency room. Carol was quickly taken inside, leaving Arthur with the two soaked children in the waiting room. "You need dry clothes," he said, noticing how they were shivering. "I'll ask someone to bring something from the hospital thrift store." A kind nurse brought simple but clean clothes for the children. Brianna took Mikey to the bathroom to change him, politely refusing the help offered. When they returned, the boy was already sleeping again in his sister's lap, now warm and dry. The hours dragged on. Arthur made several calls, arranging a private suite for Carol and ensuring that she received the best possible treatment. At one point, he noticed that Brianna was struggling to keep her eyes open. "You need to rest," he said softly. "Lie down here next to your brother." She shook her head stubbornly. "I can't sleep. I need to take care of Mikey. What if Grandma needs me?" "I'm here," Arthur assured her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'll stay awake and wake you up if there's any news about your grandmother. I promise." Reluctantly, Brianna finally gave in to exhaustion. In a few minutes, she was sleeping next to her brother on the waiting room sofa. Arthur took off his jacket and covered the two children, watching their relaxed faces in their sleep. It was only then, in the silence of the hospital dawn, that The reality of the situation hit him with full force. In less than 48 hours, his life had been turned completely upside down. He who had always prided himself on keeping everything under control now found himself completely involved with the fate of 3 people who until the day before yesterday were complete strangers. The doctor only appeared when the sun was beginning to rise. His grave face made Arthur's stomach sink. "Are you related to Mrs. Carroll?" the doctor asked in a low voice, so as not to wake the children. "No, but I'm responsible for her and her grandchildren." The doctor nodded, consulting his clipboard. "The situation is delicate. Mrs. Carroll has severe pneumonia, aggravated by years of medical neglect and precarious living conditions. In addition, we identified an advanced case of heart failure." Arthur felt the weight of those words like a physical blow. "But she's going to recover, isn't she?" The doctor hesitated. "We're doing everything we can, but the picture is very serious. Her body is very weakened. It would be important to locate some close family member." "The children are all she has," Arthur replied, looking at Brianna. "And Mikey's sleeping." "I understand," the doctor said with a sigh. "Well, we'll keep her in the ICU for now. You should take the children home, leave a contact phone number. There's nothing they can do here now." But to what home? The shack was probably underwater by then. As if reading his thoughts, the doctor added, "I saw on the news that the creek area was badly affected by the rain. There were several evacuations during the night." Arthur ran his hand over his tired face. He needed to make decisions, and quickly. He couldn't just leave those children without a place to stay. "Can I see her?" he asked the doctor. "Just for a few minutes?" In the ICU, Carol seemed even smaller and more fragile, surrounded by machines and tubes. Her chest rose and fell, with difficulty, even with the help of the equipment. Arthur approached the bed, holding her wrinkled hand carefully. "Mrs. Carroll," he whispered, "I need you to be strong. Those children need you very much." For a moment, he thought he felt a slight squeeze in her hand, but it may have just been his imagination. When he left the ICU, his decision had already been made. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't fix years of neglect and poverty that had led Carol to that situation, but he could do something for Brianna and Mikey's future. He returned to the waiting room where the children were still sleeping. Carefully, he woke Brianna up. "Honey," he said softly, "your grandmother will need to stay in the hospital for a while." The girl's eyes immediately filled with tears. "Is she going to die?" The question, so direct and painful, caught Arthur by surprise. How to explain to a 5-year-old child the seriousness of the situation without destroying her hope? "The doctors are doing everything they can," he replied cautiously. "But now we need to think about you and Mikey. You can't go back to the shack, and you need a safe place to stay." "We don't have anywhere to go," Brianna said, her voice trembling. "I have a big house with several empty rooms," Arthur said, choosing his words carefully. "You can stay with me until your grandmother gets better. What do you think?" Brianna looked at her brother, still asleep, then at Arthur. In her eyes was a mixture of fear and hope that broke his heart. "Do you promise we'll be able to see Grandma?" "Every day, if you want." The girl nodded slowly, and Arthur realized that that simple gesture carried the weight of a trust that he couldn't betray. He was about to make a silent promise, not only to those children, but to himself. But as he carried Mikey still asleep to the car, with Brianna following silently beside him, Arthur could not imagine that fate still held much greater trials for them all. The storm that had destroyed the shack was just the beginning of a journey that would test not only his determination, but also his ability to love and truly give himself for someone. The arrival at Arthur's penthouse was a moment of painful contrasts. Brianna and Mikey, still wearing the simple clothes from the hospital, looked in awe at the immense apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and elegant furniture. Their bare feet hesitated to step on the polished marble floor as if they feared staining it. "Come on, I'll show you where you're going to sleep," Arthur said gently, guiding them down the hallway. He had prepared 2 guest rooms, one next to the other. Each had its own queen-size bed with soft sheets, new pillows and warm blankets. In Mikey's room, there were even some toys that his assistant had bought in a hurry, following his instructions over the phone. "Is this all for us?" Mikey asked, his eyes widening at a teddy bear bigger than himself. "Yes, it's all for you," Arthur replied, feeling a lump in his throat as he saw the look of amazement on the boy's face. Brianna, on the other hand, remained strangely quiet. Her eyes scanned the room as if looking for a hidden trap, an explanation for such sudden generosity. "You must be hungry," Arthur commented, trying to break the uncomfortable silence. "I'll ask Mary to prepare something for you to eat." "Who's Mary?" Brianna asked, speaking for the first time since they arrived. "She's my housekeeper. She's worked here for many years, helps take care of the house." As if she had been summoned, Mary appeared in the doorway. She was a middle-aged lady with a kind face and hands that showed years of honest work. "Mr. Arthur, the children's bath is ready," she announced with a gentle smile. "And then there's hot soup waiting in the kitchen." Brianna took a step back, instinctively placing herself between Mikey and the adults. "I'll bathe my brother myself," she said with a surprising firmness for someone so small. Mary and Arthur exchanged an understanding look. "Of course, dear," Mary replied softly. "I'll just show you where everything is, okay?" While Mary guided the children to the bathroom, Arthur retreated to his office. He needed to resolve a series of urgent issues. His cell phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from the company, and there were dozens of unanswered emails. But before anything else, he made a call to his lawyer. "I need you to prepare some documents," he said as soon as George answered. "I want to establish temporary guardianship for 2 children." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Arthur, do you realize the legal complexity of this? We need the authorization of the parents or legal guardians." The only legal guardian is hospitalized in serious condition. They are 2 siblings, Brianna and Mikey, 5 and 3 years old. They have no one else in the world besides their grandmother, who may not survive. "My God, Arthur, what have you gotten yourself into?" George sighed. "Look, I'll do my best, but I need to warn you. Even with the grandmother sick, it's not that simple to assume responsibility for 2 children. Child Protective Services will want to investigate, make visits, understand the situation." "Do what is necessary," Arthur responded firmly. "These kids aren't going to a shelter." After hanging up, he stood for a long time looking out the window, watching the city below. The rain had lessened, but it was still falling in a fine, persistent drizzle. Somewhere out there, the shack where Brianna and Mikey lived was probably underwater, along with all their few possessions. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts. It was Brianna, standing at the office door, her hair still damp from her bath. "Mr. Arthur," she called timidly, "can I talk to you?" "Of course, come in," he replied, indicating a chair. "And you can just call me Arthur." The girl sat on the edge of the chair, her back straight as if she were about to give an important presentation. "Why are you doing all this for us?" The question, so direct and at the same time so complex, caught Arthur off guard. How to explain to a 5-year-old the confused feelings that moved him? "You know, Brianna," he began, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes life puts us on the right path even when we're not looking for it. When I saw you on that sidewalk, offering to shine my shoe for $1, something changed inside me." "But you're rich," she insisted. "You must know a lot of important people. Why care about us?" "Precisely because I'm rich is why I should care more," he replied, feeling the weight of each word. I've spent so long worrying about making money that I've forgotten what really matters in life. Brianna was silent for a moment, as if processing those words. What if Grandma dies? She asked finally, her voice almost a whisper. Where will we go? Arthur's heart clenched. How could such a small child carry such big worries? Brianna, look at me, he asked, leaning forward. No matter what happens, I promise you and Mikey won't be alone. I'll take care of you. Really promise? She asked, her eyes shining with contained tears. I promise. It was then that something unexpected happened. Brianna got up from the chair and, hesitant, took 2 steps towards Arthur. Before he could react, she hugged him, burying her face in his chest. For a moment, Arthur stood paralyzed, surprised by that gesture of absolute trust. Then, slowly, he wrapped the girl in his arms, feeling her small body tremble with silent sobs. It's okay, he murmured, stroking her hair. You can cry. Sometimes we need to. And there, in the silence of the office, while holding that child who had suffered so much, Arthur felt something awaken in his chest, a feeling that he had not experienced in a long time, something that went beyond compassion or moral duty. But his moment of epiphany was interrupted by a shout coming from the kitchen. It was Mary. Mr. Arthur, come quick, it's the hospital. Arthur's heart froze. Brianna pulled away sharply, the fear etched on her face. Together, they ran to the kitchen, where Mary was holding the phone with trembling hands. The doctor wants to talk to you, she said, extending the device. It's about Mrs. Carroll. As he took the phone, Arthur noticed that Mikey had stopped eating his soup and was looking at everyone with frightened eyes. Whatever the doctor had to say, it would forever change the fate of those 2 children who in so little time had become so important in his life. The silence in the kitchen was so thick it felt suffocating as Arthur listened to the doctor on the phone. Mary had pulled Mikey onto her lap, trying to distract him with a story, but the boy kept his eyes fixed on Arthur's face. Brianna stood paralyzed beside the table, her small hands tightly gripping the back of a chair. I understand, Arthur said finally, his voice controlled. We'll be there in 20 minutes. When he hung up the phone, 3 pairs of eyes stared at him anxiously. Your grandmother took a turn for the worse, he explained gently to Brianna. The doctors need to do an emergency procedure, and they want us to be there. Is she going to die? Brianna's question came out as a painful whisper. I don't know, honey, Arthur replied honestly, but the doctors are doing everything they can. Mary was already standing, grabbing coats for the children. The weather had cooled down considerably after the rain. I'm going with you, she declared in a tone that brooked no argument. During the drive to the hospital, Mikey slept in Mary's lap in the back seat, while Brianna kept her gaze fixed on the window, her face reflected in the glass, showing an expression far beyond her 5 years. At the hospital, they were greeted by Dr. Paul, the same doctor who had treated Carol the night before. His face was grave as he led them to a small meeting room. Mrs. Carroll suffered a cardiac arrest about an hour ago, he explained bluntly. We managed to revive her, but her condition is extremely delicate. Her heart is very weak, and the pneumonia has worsened significantly. Brianna, who was sitting between Arthur and Mary, squeezed his hand so hard that her small fingernails left marks on his skin. We need to do emergency surgery, the doctor continued. But I must be honest, the chances are very small. Her body is very weakened. Can I see her? Brianna asked, her voice trembling. Just a little bit? The doctor hesitated. She's sedated, preparing for surgery, but yes, you can see her for a few minutes. Just you, okay? Arthur got up to accompany her, but Brianna surprised him. I want to go alone. All the adults in the room exchanged worried glances, but something in the determination of the girl's face prevented them from arguing. A nurse led her to the ICU, while the others waited in a silence laden with apprehension. Mikey had woken up and was now playing distractedly with a toy car that Mary always carried in her purse, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. 10 minutes later, Brianna returned. Her eyes were red but dry. She walked straight to Arthur and climbed onto his lap, something she had never done before. "Grandma talked to me," she said softly. "She talked?" Arthur asked, surprised, since the doctor had said that Carol was sedated. "Not with her mouth," Brianna explained, "but I felt it. She told me to take care of Mikey and—" Her voice faltered. For a moment, she said that you will take care of us. The lump that formed in Arthur's throat prevented him from answering. He just hugged Brianna tighter, feeling her little body tremble slightly against his chest. The next hours were torture. The surgery lasted longer than expected. Mary had taken Mikey home, promising to put him to bed, but Brianna flatly refused to leave the hospital. It was already past midnight when Dr. Paul appeared again. His face said it all even before he opened his mouth. "I'm sorry," he began, but Brianna interrupted him. "Grandma went to heaven, right?" The doctor nodded, visibly moved by the girl's maturity. "Yes, honey. We did everything we could, but her heart was too tired." Brianna didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't show any of the reactions one might expect from a 5-year-old child who had just lost her only family. Instead, she turned to Arthur and said with a frightening seriousness, "Now it's just me and Mikey." "No," Arthur replied firmly, kneeling to be at her level. "Now you have me too. And I promise, Brianna, I promise by the memory of your grandmother that I will take care of you too, as if you were my own children." It was then that the tears finally came. Not in dramatic sobs or cries of despair, but in a silent and deep cry that seemed to come from her very soul. Arthur held her as she cried, feeling his own tears run down his face. Dr. Paul stepped away discreetly, leaving them alone with their pain and their new reality. Outside, the night was clear after days of rain, and the stars shone with a particular intensity, as if they wanted to show Carol the way home. But new challenges awaited them. The next morning, while Brianna was still sleeping on the waiting room couch, Arthur received a call from George, his lawyer. "Arthur, we have a problem." George's voice sounded tense. "Child Protective Services has been notified about the situation. They want to make an emergency visit today." "And what's the problem?" Arthur asked, feeling a chill down his spine. "They have some concerns about a single man with no experience with children suddenly assuming guardianship of 2 minors, especially a girl." Arthur's stomach churned with the insinuation. "What are they suggesting? That maybe it would be better to send the children to a temporary shelter until a suitable family can be found?" "No," Arthur replied with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I won't allow them to separate these children. They've already lost everything, George. I won't let them lose each other too." "I figured you'd say that," George sighed. "That's why I'm already preparing all the necessary documentation. But I need to warn you, it's going to be a tough battle." When he hung up the phone, Arthur looked at the sleeping Brianna. Her face still showed traces of tears shed, but there was a peace in her sleep that he swore to protect at any cost. No matter what lay ahead, he would not let anything hurt those children again, even if he had to fight the whole world for it. The morning after Carol's passing dawned with a cruel clarity. Arthur hadn't slept, alternating between watching Brianna sleep on the hospital couch and making endless calls with his lawyer. Mary had stayed home with Mikey, trying to maintain some normalcy in the life of the boy who, at just 3 years old, still didn't fully understand what was happening. At 9 o'clock sharp, George arrived at the hospital. The lawyer, normally impeccable in his expensive suits, seemed to have aged 10 years since the last time Arthur had seen him. The representatives from Child Protective Services will arrive. In an hour, he informed in a low voice, so as not to wake Brianna. We need to be prepared. What do you mean, prepared? Arthur asked, feeling irritation growing. They just lost their grandmother. What more do they want? George sighed, pulling Arthur to a more secluded corner. Arthur, I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. In the eyes of the law, you are a complete stranger to these children. A single man, with no experience in raising children, who suddenly wants to assume guardianship of two vulnerable minors. But I can give them a decent life. It's not just about money, George explained patiently. They're going to investigate your motives, your personal life, your work. They're going to want guarantees that you can offer not only material support, but also emotional stability and a suitable family environment. Before Arthur could answer, a movement on the couch caught his attention. Brianna was waking up, her swollen eyes blinking against the bright morning light. Good morning, honey, Arthur approached, trying to keep his voice calm. Did you sleep well? Brianna nodded slightly, then her eyes widened in panic. Mikey, where's my brother? He's at home with Mary, Arthur assured quickly. She gave him breakfast and said they were going to bake cookies together. The girl relaxed a little, but Arthur could see that something still bothered her. Can I see Grandma? She asked in a whisper. Arthur's heart clenched. How to explain to a 5-year-old the procedures after death, how to make her understand that she would never see her grandmother again. Brianna, he began, sitting next to her, your grandmother. She's already been prepared for the funeral. We'll say goodbye to her this afternoon, okay? The girl's eyes filled with tears, but she contained them with an impressive willpower. Grandma will be in a casket. Yes, honey, like Grandpa. Arthur didn't know this part of the story. You remember your grandfather? Brianna shook her head. No, but Grandma showed me pictures. She said he went to heaven when I was a baby. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 2 women, with serious expressions, accompanied by a man carrying a folder. Arthur recognized the Child Protective Services badge on their name tags. Mr. Arthur, the older of the women introduced herself. I'm Regina Santos, a CPS caseworker. These are my colleagues, Dr. Paula Mendez, psychologist, and Dr. Roberto Alves, social worker. Brianna immediately moved closer to Arthur, grabbing his hand tightly. Could we talk in private? Regina asked, looking meaningfully at the girl. I'm not going to leave Brianna alone, Arthur replied firmly. Mr. Arthur, the psychologist intervened in a soft voice. We understand your concern, but we need to discuss sensitive issues. Dr. Paula can stay with Brianna while we talk. Before Arthur could protest, Brianna spoke, her voice small but determined. I don't want to stay with her. I want to stay with Uncle Arthur. The 3 CPS representatives exchanged worried glances. Regina cleared her throat before speaking. Brianna, honey, we're here to help you and your little brother. I need to ask Mr. Arthur some questions to make sure you're going to be okay. We're already okay, Brianna replied, her voice trembling slightly. Uncle Arthur takes care of us. How long exactly have you known these children? Regina asked, directly to Arthur, her tone making her distrust clear. George, who had remained silent until then, intervened. If you allow me, I have all the relevant documentation here, including Mrs. Carroll's medical records and— 4 days, Arthur interrupted, his voice clear and firm. I met Brianna 4 days ago when she was trying to earn $1 shining shoes to feed her brother and her sick grandmother. The silence that followed his statement was heavy. Regina made notes furiously in her notepad, while the social worker shook his head in disapproval. Mr. Arthur, Regina said finally, you must agree that this situation is, to say the least, irregular. We cannot simply allow 2 vulnerable children to remain in the custody of a stranger without any family or legal ties. And what's the alternative? Arthur asked, feeling the anger growing. To send two children who just lost their only family to a shelter, to separate them from each other? There are legal procedures that need to be followed, the social worker argued. Registered families who can... No! Arthur Yanna's shout surprised everyone. I don't want to go to another family. I want to stay with Uncle Arthur. He promised he would take care of us. He promised Grandma. The tears she had held back until then finally overflowed. Arthur pulled her onto his lap, letting her cry against his chest while stroking her hair. Please, he begged the CPS representatives. His voice choked with emotion. Don't do this to them. I know I seem like an unlikely choice, but I love these children as if they were my own. I'll do whatever is necessary, courses, counseling, whatever you want, but don't separate them. The psychologist, who had remained silent observing the interaction, finally spoke. Regina, I think we should consider a more in-depth evaluation before making any drastic decisions. It's evident that there is an emotional bond here. Regina sighed, looking at Yanna, who was still sobbing in Arthur's lap. We can do an evaluation period, 3 months, with weekly follow-up visits. But I need to make it clear. Any sign of irregularity, anything that puts the well-being of these children at risk, and they will be immediately removed. George quickly began pulling documents from his folder, but Arthur barely heard the legal explanations that followed. His attention was entirely focused on the girl in his arms, who was gradually calming down. It's going to be okay, he whispered to her. I promise it's going to be okay. But while the adults discussed procedures and signed papers, Arthur couldn't. Imagine that his promise would be tested in ways he could never foresee. The path that lay ahead was fraught with challenges that would require much more than goodwill and financial resources. It would require a complete transformation not only of his life, but of his own heart. Carol's funeral was held that same afternoon. Arthur had arranged everything with Mary's help, a dignified casket, white flowers, and a small ceremony that allowed the children to say goodbye to their grandmother properly. Yanna insisted on wearing the only dress she had managed to salvage from the shack, a faded blue dress that Carol had bought for her on her last birthday. The sky was clear, as if nature wanted to make up for the days of storm that had preceded that moment. Mikey, not fully understanding what was happening, played with a toy car in Mary's lap, while Jan remained beside the casket, serious and silent, like a little sentinel. Grandma, she whispered when the time came to close the casket. I promise I'll take good care of Mikey, and I'll study hard like you always wanted. Arthur, who was close enough to hear, felt his heart break once again. How was it possible for such a small child to carry such a great sense of responsibility? After the burial, when they were returning home, Mikey finally asked the question they all feared. When is Grandma coming back? The car fell silent. Mary held the boy in the back seat, silent tears streaming down her face. It was Jan who answered, Grandma went to live with the angels, Mikey, like Grandpa. Now she's going to take care of us from up there. The simplicity and wisdom of that explanation left everyone speechless. Arthur, driving, had to pull over for a moment, unable to contain his own tears. The days that followed were an exercise in adaptation for everyone. Mary practically moved into the apartment, helping to establish a routine for the children. Mikey gradually got used to his new room full of toys, but still had nightmares at night, crying for his grandmother. Yana, on the other hand, seemed to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders. She insisted on making her own bed, folding her clothes, helping Mary in the kitchen. At night, Arthur often found her in her brother's room, watching over his sleep. You need to rest, too, he said gently on one of those nights, finding her sitting on the floor beside Mikey's bed. I can't, she replied, her voice small in the darkness. What if he needs me? I'm here now, Arthur assured, sitting beside her. You don't have to do everything alone anymore. Jan was silent for a long moment before speaking, Are you going to leave one day too? The question hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. No, honey, I'm not going to leave. Never. Grandma also said she wasn't going to leave, she whispered. And for the first time since the funeral, she began to cry. Arthur picked her up, letting her finally release all the pain she had been holding back. Her little body trembled with sobs as he rocked her gently, murmuring words of comfort. It was that same night that Arthur made a decision that would completely change his life. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting of the board of directors of his company. "I'm going to step down from the CEO position," he announced to a room full of stunned executives. "I'll remain on the board, but I need to dedicate more time to my family." "Family?" his vice president questioned, confused. "Since when do you have a family, Arthur?" "Since 2 extraordinary children entered my life," he replied simply. "And they need me now more than this company." The news that the powerful businessman Arthur had adopted 2 children from the slums spread quickly. Through the city's social circles, reactions were diverse, from admiration to open suspicion. "He must be going crazy," Arthur heard a former partner comment at a meeting, "giving up everything because of 2 street urchins." But the opinions of others were the least of his concerns. The weekly visits from Child Protective Services were thorough and stressful. Regina, the caseworker, seemed determined to find flaws in his arrangements. "The girl still demonstrates worrying behaviors," she noted on one of her visits. "Excessive responsibility, difficulty playing and behaving like a child. It's a process," the psychologist who accompanied the children argued. "Yana has spent years having to be an adult. We can't expect her to change overnight." The therapy sessions were another challenge. Mikey adapted easily, using the toys in the playroom to express his feelings. But Jan resisted, remaining closed off and distrustful. "She only really opens up with you," the therapist commented to Arthur after a particularly difficult session. "The bond you've developed is extraordinary." And it was true. Gradually, Yana began to show small signs of trust, like on the morning when she appeared in Arthur's office with a drawing. "It's our family," she explained timidly. "You, me, Mikey, and Mary, and Grandma up in heaven, watching over us." Arthur hung the drawing on the most important wall of the office, right next to his diplomas and certificates. For him, that paper full of colorful figures was worth more than all the titles in the world. But not everything was moments of progress. There were difficult days, like when Mikey had a high fever and spent the whole night crying for his grandmother. Or when Jan refused to go to her new school, clinging to the car gates and begging not to be left there. "What if you don't come back for me?" she asked, trembling with fear. "Yana, look at me," Arthur asked, kneeling in front of her. "Remember what I promised? I'll never abandon you. I'll be here at dismissal time every day." And he was, no matter what important meeting he had to postpone or what appointment he had to cancel. Arthur never missed a single school pickup. Gradually, Yana began to believe that maybe, just maybe, some promises could be kept. But while the small family began to find its rhythm, a shadow approached silently. Something that none of them could foresee, something that would test the bonds they were building in a way that no one imagined possible. The news arrived on a Monday morning, 3 months after Carol's funeral. Arthur was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with Mary, a new routine he had developed to spend more time with the children before school, when George, his lawyer, called. "Arthur, we need to talk urgently." George's normally controlled voice sounded tense. "They found an aunt of the children." The cup Arthur was holding slipped from his hand, shattering on the floor. Mary, who was helping Mikey with his cereal, looked startled. "What do you mean, an aunt?" Arthur asked, moving away so the children wouldn't hear. "Apparently it's a younger sister of the children's mother. She lives in another city, learned about Carol's death by chance, and is claiming guardianship." The world seemed to spin under Arthur's feet. But what about the CPS evaluation period? We still have 2 weeks. That's the thing, George sighed heavily. The presence of a direct family member completely changes the picture. The CPS is going to give her priority. At that moment, Jana entered the kitchen, already dressed for school in her new uniform. Her morning smile disappeared when she saw the shards of porcelain on the floor and the expression on Arthur's face. "Did something happen?" she asked, her small voice filled with worry. "No, honey." Arthur forced a smile, hanging up the phone. "I just dropped a cup. Let's have breakfast." But while they were serving breakfast, Arthur could barely swallow. His mind was racing, thinking about all the implications of that news. How would he explain it to the children? How would Jan, who was already so afraid of abandonment, react? "You're acting weird," Jana commented when they were in the car on the way to school. "Are you sure nothing happened?" The girl's ability to perceive the emotional nuances of others sometimes frightened Arthur. It was as if she had developed a kind of radar to detect problems, probably a result of years of having to be alert to protect her brother. "We need to talk later," he said finally, "but now you need to focus on school, okay?" Jana nodded, but Arthur could see from the tension in her small shoulders that she was worried. As soon as he dropped the children off at school, he hurried to George's office. Regina, the CPS caseworker, was already there, along with a woman he didn't know. "Mr. Arthur," Regina greeted him formally. "This is Ms. Claire Mendez, the children's maternal aunt." Claire was a woman of about 40 years old, with features that vaguely resembled Jan's. She dressed simply but neatly, and there was something in her eyes that made Arthur uneasy. "Why are you only showing up now?" he asked, unable to contain the hostility in his voice. I lost contact with my sister many years ago," Claire explained, twisting her hands in her lap. After she abandoned the children, I tried to find them, but Carol had moved. I only found out about everything now." "And you think you can just show up and take them?" Arthur felt his voice rising. "They've suffered too many losses already." "Mr. Arthur," Regina intervened firmly, "I understand your concern, but Ms. Claire is family to the children. She has legal priority." "And what does she know about them?" Arthur questioned bitterly. "Does she know that Mikey only sleeps with the light on? That Jan checks 3 times to make sure the door is locked before sleeping? Does she know that she still keeps that shoeshine brush under her bed as if it were a talisman?" Claire seemed to wilt a little in her chair. "I can learn," she murmured. "They're my nephews and niece, after all." "They're much more than that," Arthur replied, running a hand over his tired face. "They're 2 children who have already lost everything once, who are finally starting to trust again, to feel safe." George cleared his throat, calling everyone's attention. "Maybe we can reach an agreement. Miss Claire could have the right to regular visits, keeping the children where they are." "No," Claire interrupted, her voice suddenly firmer. "I want to take them with me. I can give them a home, a real family." "They already have a family," Arthur exploded, standing up. "What do you think is going to happen when you tell Jan that you're going to separate her from everything she knows again? Do you have any idea of the trauma that's going to cause?" Regina made some notes in her folder before speaking. "I propose a transition period. Ms. Claire can start by visiting the children, letting them get used to her presence. Meanwhile, we'll do a full assessment of the conditions she can offer." But Arthur barely heard. His mind was on the promise he had made to Jan, on the trust he saw growing in her eyes every day. How could he tell her that he might not be able to keep his word? The rest of the meeting passed like a blur. When he finally left the office, Arthur felt physically and emotionally exhausted. He looked at his watch. It was almost time to pick up the children from school. On the way, he stopped the car at a red light, and his eyes fell on the drawing that Jan had made, now stuck on the car's dashboard. Their family, all together, with Carol looking down from heaven. How could he allow that family to be broken, apart? But the worst was yet to come, because when he arrived at the school, he found Jan sitting alone on the waiting bench, her little face marked by silent tears. "What's wrong, honey?" he asked, alarmed, kneeling in front of her. "I heard," she whispered. "I heard the principal talking on the phone about an aunt who wants to take Mikey and me away." Arthur's heart stopped. How to explain to a 5-year-old the complexities of the legal system? How to make her understand that sometimes not all the love in the world is enough against the rules of adults? "Jana," he began, but she interrupted him. "You promised." Her voice was choked with emotion. "You promised you weren't going to abandon us." "And I won't," Arthur replied firmly, pulling her into a hug. "No matter what happens, I'm going to fight for you. Until the end." But while hugging that little girl who had become the center of his world, Arthur knew that the battle ahead of him would be the most difficult of his life. And this time, all his money and influence might not be enough to guarantee victory. The first meeting with Claire was scheduled for a Saturday morning at Arthur's apartment. Mary had spent hours baking cookies and tidying up the house, more out of nervousness than out of need. Jana hadn't slept well the night before, and her deep dark circles under her eyes betrayed her emotional state. Emotional. "I don't want to meet her," Jana declared for the 10th time that morning, sitting at the kitchen table without touching her breakfast. "I know, honey," Arthur replied patiently, "but we need to at least try. She's your mother's sister." "I don't want to know about my mother," Jana shouted suddenly, surprising everyone. It was the first time the girl had raised her voice since they had met her. "She left! She didn't want us!" Mikey, who was playing with his toy cars on the kitchen floor, stopped at the sound of his sister's shout, his eyes filled with tears. "Sissy mad?" he asked in a trembling voice. Jana immediately changed her posture, running to hug her brother. "No, Mikey, sorry. Sissy's just sad." The doorbell rang at that moment. Mary went to answer it, while Arthur tried to calm the children. Claire entered the room accompanied by Regina from Child Protective Services, carrying 2 bags of gifts. "Hi, little ones," she said with a nervous smile. "I'm your Aunt Claire." Jan positioned herself in front of Mikey instinctively, as she always did when she sensed a threat. The boy clung to his sister's legs, hiding his face. "I brought some gifts for you," Claire continued, extending the bags. "We don't want gifts," Jan replied coldly. "Jan," Arthur gently reprimanded her. "Your aunt came from far away to meet you." "Why didn't you come before?" the girl asked, her eyes fixed on Claire. "Where were you when we needed food? When Grandma got sick?" Claire paled visibly. Regina intervened quickly. "Jan, honey, sometimes adults make mistakes. Your aunt is trying to fix things now." "There's nothing to fix," Jan replied. "We already have a family." The silence that followed was heavy. Claire left the bags on the floor and cautiously approached the children. "I know you're scared," she said softly, "but I'm your real aunt. I even have pictures of your mother when she was little. You look a lot like her." It was the wrong thing to say. Jan took a step back, pulling Mikey with her. "I don't want to know about her," the girl said through her teeth. "She abandoned us. Your mother, she had problems," Claire tried to explain. "She was sick, she couldn't—" "Stop it!" Jan shouted again, and this time there were tears in her eyes. "I don't want to hear it. I want you to leave." Mikey began to cry, frightened by the situation. Mary quickly picked him up, taking him to the kitchen. Arthur knelt beside Jana, who was trembling. "Jana, look at me," he asked gently. "No one is going to force you to do anything, but your aunt came from far away. She wants to take us away," Jana sobbed. "I heard. She wants to separate us from you." Claire took a step forward, her own tears starting to fall. I don't want to separate anyone, honey. I just want to be a part of your lives. Liar! Yana shouted. Everyone lies, everyone leaves. Before anyone could react, the girl ran towards her room. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the apartment. Maybe it's best if we continue another day, Regina suggested. Visibly disturbed by the situation, Claire looked devastated. I just wanted to help. They're my nephews and niece, my blood. Blood isn't everything, Arthur replied, his voice controlled but firm. These children need stability, security, not more changes. Are you suggesting that I can't give that to them? Claire asked, a defensive tone in her voice. I'm saying they already have that here, Arthur replied. Look around, Claire. See their drawings on the walls, the toys scattered, the pictures on the refrigerator. This is their home. Regina cleared her throat, consulting her notes. Yana's reaction was concerning. I'm going to request an additional psychological evaluation. She's just scared, Arthur defended. Any child would react like that after everything she's been through. At that moment, they heard a noise coming from Jan's room. Arthur ran there, followed by the others. The girl was sitting on the floor of the closet, surrounded by scattered clothes, holding her old shoeshine brush against her chest. Jane, Arthur called softly. I don't want to leave, she whispered without looking at anyone. Please don't let her take us. Arthur's heart broke at the sight of the despair in her eyes. Ignoring the presence of the others, he sat on the floor beside Jana and pulled her onto his lap. No one is going to take you or Mikey anywhere, he promised, kissing the top of her head. I'm going to fight for you with all my strength. Claire watched the scene from the door, silent tears streaming down her face. It was then that Regina did something unexpected. Claire, she called softly, we need to talk, in private. The two women withdrew, leaving Arthur consoling Jan. Mary appeared shortly afterwards with Mikey, who immediately ran to join his sister's embrace. When Claire and Regina returned, about half an hour later, there was something different in the aunt's demeanor. Mr. Arthur, she said, her voice choked with emotion, I think I made a mistake. I came here thinking only of my rights, of what I wanted, but now I see that they already have a father. Arthur raised his eyes, surprised by those words. Jana, still in his lap, also looked at her aunt for the first time without hostility. I'm not going to fight for custody anymore, Claire continued, but can I still be a part of their lives? As an aunt only? I promised not to interfere, not to cause problems. The silence that followed was broken by Jana's small voice. Can you be our real dad now? The question, so innocent and at the same time so profound, made all the adults in the room hold their breath. Arthur felt his heart expand in a way he didn't know was possible. Only if you want me to, he replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. I do, Mikey shouted, jumping onto Arthur's lap. I want you to be my daddy. Jana didn't say anything, but her tight hug said everything that needed to be said. But while everyone celebrated that moment of apparent resolution, no one noticed the strange expression on Regina's face as she made her final notes. An expression that suggested that story had not yet reached its end. In the days that followed the meeting with Claire, a new routine began to establish itself in the house. The children seemed lighter, especially Jan, who for the first time began to act like a child her age. Arthur had officially started the adoption process, and the prospect of becoming a real family brought an atmosphere of joy to the apartment. Mary watched, touched, as Jana now played with her dolls, instead of constantly worrying about household chores. Mikey, who had previously been shy and reserved, filled the house with his laughter and running. The nights of nightmares had decreased considerably. On an especially significant afternoon, Jana arrived from school carrying a colored paper. It's family day at school next week, she announced, extending the invitation to Arthur. The teacher said that all the parents have to go. The word parents made Arthur's heart leap. It was the first time Jan had used that term to refer to him, even if indirectly. "Of course I'm going, honey," he replied, trying to control the emotion in his voice. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." "Can I bring Mary too?" she asked timidly. "The teacher said you can bring the whole family." "Of course you can," Mary replied from the kitchen, where she was preparing the snack, her hands trembling slightly at hearing the request. It was that same night, while putting the children to bed, that Arthur noticed a significant change in Jan's room. The old shoe shine brush, which had previously been religiously kept under her pillow, was now stored in a decorated box on the shelf. "I don't need it anymore," Jan explained when she noticed his gaze. "Now I have you to take care of us." Arthur had to hold back tears right there. Instead, he sat on the edge of the bed and began to tell the bedtime story she had chosen. It was about a family of birds building a new nest, her favorite in recent weeks. But the peace they had finally achieved was about to be shattered. On the morning of Family Day, while Arthur was preparing to leave with the children, George appeared at his apartment without notice. "Regina submitted her final report yesterday," he said without preamble, his face tense. "And it's not good, Arthur." "What do you mean it's not good?" Arthur asked, lowering his voice so that the children who were playing in the living room wouldn't hear. "Claire gave up custody. The children are fine, happy." "She questioned your motives," George explained, running a hand over his tired face. "She suggested that you may be compensating for something, using the children to fill an emotional void." "That's ridiculous," Arthur exploded, then immediately lowered his voice when he saw Jan looking in his direction. "Those children are my life now." "That's exactly her point," George sighed. "She argues that you abandoned your career, completely changed your lifestyle, all for 2 children you met a few months ago. She suggests that this demonstrates unstable behavior." "Unstable?" Arthur felt his blood boil. "Unstable is letting 2 children who have already suffered so much be thrown into the system." George placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, buddy, but we need to keep calm. This kind of outburst is only going to give more ammunition to those who question your emotional stability." Regina consulted her notes. "I have here statements from several of your former employees. They all talk about drastic changes in your behavior in recent months. Abandonment of important meetings, erratic decisions, impulsive, obsessively dedicated to the children. And that's bad." Arthur asked, his voice trembling with contained anger. "Is dedicating myself to the children I promised to protect a sign of instability?" "The problem," Regina continued impassively, "is the pattern of behavior. You abandoned a 30-year career, cut ties with practically all your old contacts, isolated yourself socially except for the presence of the children and the housekeeper." "Mary's practically family," Arthur protested. "Exactly," Regina pointed out. "You've created a kind of parallel world, a bubble, where only the 4 of you exist. That's not healthy, not for you or for the children." George cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Maybe we could consider some changes, hiring an additional nanny, resuming some professional activities." "No," Arthur cut in. "I'm not going to pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. Those children don't need a busy businessman who sees them 2 hours a day. They need a present father. And it's exactly that kind of radical thinking that worries us." Regina sighed. "Mr. Arthur, no one questions your love for the children, but love sometimes can be obsessive." At that moment, Arthur's phone rang. It was the school. His heart froze as he answered. "Mr. Arthur." The principal's voice sounded strained. "There's been an incident. We need you to come immediately." The drive to the school was the longest of his life. When he arrived, he found Brianna sitting in the principal's office, her eyes red from crying. Mikey was beside her, clutching her hand. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling in front of the children. The principal explained that some parents, after reading the newspaper, had made comments at the school gate. Their children, in turn, repeated those comments during recess. "They said," Brianna sobbed, "that you're not our real dad, that you only want us because you're a bad person." Arthur's heart broke hearing those words. "Brianna, look at me. Do you believe that?" The girl shook her head vehemently. "No, I hit the boy who said that. That's why they sent me." To the principal's office. In any other situation, Arthur would have scolded Brianna for using violence. But at that moment, all he could do was hug her tight. "I want to go home," Mikey whimpered. "I don't want to come to school anymore." On the way home, Arthur tried to keep his composure as his world crumbled. The children were silent in the back seat, still shaken by the events. It was when they arrived at the apartment building that the situation worsened. There were reporters waiting with cameras and microphones. As soon as they saw him, they swarmed like vultures. "Mr. Arthur, is it true you're having a nervous breakdown? Are the children being used to improve your public image? Are there allegations of inappropriate behavior?" He didn't let them finish. Picking up Mikey and holding Brianna's hand tightly, he pushed his way through the reporters, shielding the children with his body. When they finally got to the apartment, Mary was waiting for them in tears. "Child Protective Services called," she said, her voice trembling. They want to do an emergency evaluation tomorrow." Brianna, who had remained strong until that moment, finally broke down. "Don't let them take us," she screamed, clinging to Arthur's legs. "Please, Daddy, don't let them." Arthur knelt down, hugging both children, because that's what they were, his children, no matter what anyone said. "No one's going to take you," he promised, his voice firm despite the tears threatening to fall. But as he hugged the children, an idea began to form in his mind. A dangerous, desperate idea, but one that might be the only way to keep his family together. What he didn't know was that decision, made in the heat of the moment, would trigger a series of events that no one could foresee. That night, after the children finally fell asleep, Brianna and Mikey together in the same bed, clinging to each other as if they feared being separated in their sleep. Arthur gathered Mary and George in his study. "I need you to listen to me," he began, his voice low but determined. "And I need you to trust me, even if it seems crazy." Mary and George exchanged worried glances. They had never seen Arthur like this, with a mixture of despair and determination in his eyes. "What are you planning?" George asked cautiously. "I'm going to give it all up," Arthur replied simply. "The company, the assets, everything. I'm going to transfer all my assets to a trust fund in the children's names, which can only be accessed when they come of age." "But why?" Mary asked, confused. "Because that's what they're using against me," Arthur explained. "They say I'm unstable because I abandoned my career, that I use my money to compensate for emotional problems. Well, I'm going to show them that it's not the money that matters." George stood up, agitated. "Arthur, this is crazy. You've built up this wealth over 30 years. And what good is all this money if I can't protect my children?" Arthur retorted. "But I need your help. Mary, would you accept—" "You don't even need to finish the sentence," she interrupted, tears in her eyes. "You know I'll go with you to the end of the world." George ran a hand over his face, clearly disturbed. "And where do you plan to go?" "I have a small house on the beach," Arthur revealed. "I bought it years ago, before the company's success. It's registered in my late mother's name. No one knows about it. We can start over there, have a simple life." "And the children?" George insisted. "School, friends." "I've already researched it," Arthur replied. "There's an excellent public school in the area. I can work as a freelance consultant from home. Mary can continue to help us if she wants to. It will be a different life, but we'll be together." The silence that followed was interrupted by a small noise at the door. It was Brianna, standing in the doorway in her unicorn pajamas, her eyes wide. "Brianna!" Arthur exclaimed, surprised. "Honey, you should be sleeping." "Are you going to give up everything because of us?" she asked, her voice trembling. Arthur knelt down in front of her. "No, honey, I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing what's most important. But your company, your money." To Brianna, he held her small hands in his. "Remember what you said at school, that sometimes your heart is more important than blood. Well, sometimes love is more important than money, too." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "But what if it doesn't work out? What if we get poor again?" "We won't get poor," Arthur assured her. "We'll have a simpler life, but you'll never lack anything, and more importantly, we'll be together." Brianna was silent for a moment, processing all this. Then, surprisingly, a small smile appeared on her face. "Can we bring Toto?" Toto was the stuffed dog that Arthur had given her on her first day in the new house. "Of course," he laughed, relieved by her reaction. "We can bring all the toys." "And is Mary coming too?" "Yes, honey," Mary replied, wiping away her own tears. "Someone needs to take care of you all." George watched the scene with a complex expression. "Arthur," he called finally, "if we're going to do this, we need to act fast, before the Child Protective Services evaluation tomorrow. How long do you need to prepare the documents? I can have everything ready by dawn. But Arthur, are you absolutely sure about this?" In response, Arthur just picked up Brianna and hugged her tight. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life." The next few hours were a whirlwind of silent activity. While George worked on the documents in his study, Mary and Arthur discreetly packed what they needed for the departure. Clothes, documents, some special toys. Brianna, who refused to go back to bed, helped in her own way, carefully selecting which drawings to take from the walls. Around 4 in the morning, Mikey woke up and found everyone busy. "Are we going on a trip?" he asked, sleepily. "Yes, son," Arthur replied, picking him up. "We're going to a new place near the sea. It's going to be an adventure." "Is the sea blue like in the drawings?" "Even bluer," Arthur promised, feeling his heart clench with the innocence of the question. At 6 in the morning, George returned with a stack of documents. "It's all ready," he announced. "The trust fund is established, the transfers scheduled. The moment you sign these papers, you officially won't own anything but the beach house." Arthur didn't hesitate to sign each document. With each signature, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. When he finished, he looked at his makeshift family. Mary organizing the last things, Mikey sleeping on the couch, Brianna holding Toto with a serious expression. "It's time to go," he said softly. But as they were about to leave, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang. The sound echoed through the apartment like a gunshot. It was only 6:30 in the morning. Who could it be? George peeked through the peephole and his face paled. "It's Regina," he whispered, "and she's not alone." Arthur's heart stopped for a moment. All his plan, all his sacrifice, would it all be in vain? Brianna grabbed his hand tightly. "Daddy," she called, the fear evident in her voice. And at that moment, looking into his daughter's frightened eyes, Arthur knew that regardless of what happened next, he had made the right decision, because sometimes true love demands sacrifices that no money in the world can buy. The seconds that followed the doorbell seemed an eternity. Arthur looked at his family, Mary holding a sleeping Mikey, Brianna holding his hand, George at the door. He knew it was the moment of truth. "Open it," he said to George, his voice surprisingly calm. When the door opened, it revealed not just Regina, but Claire, the children's aunt, and a lady Arthur didn't know. She introduced herself as Dr. Helena Santos, supervisor from Child Protective Services. "Can I know what you're doing here this early?" George asked, stalling. "We received a call." Regina answered, her eyes scanning the packed luggage in the hall. Looks like we're just in time. It was then that Claire took a step forward, tears pouring down her face. It was me, she confessed. I called them. You? Arthur felt betrayed. But you said you gave up on the guardianship. I did, Claire answered. I didn't come here to take the kids away. I came to tell the truth. Dr. Helena nodded, asking to come inside. Arthur, still confused, let them in. They all gathered in the living room, the heavy silence only broken by Mikey's soft breathing, who still slept in Mary's arms. Mr. Arthur, Claire started, her voice shaking, when I read the article in the paper, when I saw what they were doing to you, I couldn't stay quiet, because I know the truth about my sister, Brianna, and Mikey's mother. Brianna, who was hiding behind Arthur, took a small step forward. The truth is, my sister didn't abandon her children. Claire continued. She died. She died trying to protect them. The shock of the revelation made everyone hold their breath. Brianna squeezed Arthur's hand even harder. She had a drug problem, Claire explained, wiping her tears. But she was trying to get better because of the kids. Their father, a violent man, found her in the rehabilitation clinic. There was a fight. She didn't survive her injuries. Why didn't Grandma Carol tell us? Brianna asked, her voice small but firm. To protect you, Claire answered. Grandma was afraid he'd come back. That's why she moved so much. That's why she avoided even me. Dr. Helena, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke. Claire brought us documentation that proves this story. And more importantly, she showed us something that completely changed our evaluation of the case. She took an envelope from her briefcase. Inside was a letter, the paper yellowed over time. This letter was written by Celinda just before she died, she explained. Claire found it among her belongings. With trembling hands, Arthur took the letter and started to read aloud. To whomever finds these children after I'm gone, I know my time is coming to an end. The sickness that consumes me won't wait much longer. My only regret is that I won't be able to protect my grandchildren for as long as they need me. Brianna, my little warrior, had to grow up too fast. She carries a weight in her shoulders that no kid should carry. Mikey barely remembers what it's like to have a normal family. My last wish, my last prayer, is that these children find someone that can give them what I couldn't. Not just a roof and food, but true love, protection, the chance of being children again. If you're reading this, if you found my grandchildren, please take care of them. Not by duty, not by obligation, but with love, because only love can heal the wounds that they carry. With hope and gratitude, Celinda. When Arthur was done reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Brianna sobbed openly, and even Regina looked emotional. Mr. Arthur, Dr. Helena said softly, when we received this letter and heard Claire's statement, we re-evaluated the whole case. You're not a man having a nervous breakdown. You're exactly what Celinda asked for in her last prayer, someone who loves these children more than anything. So, he barely dared to hope. So, she smiled, I'm here in person to inform you that your adoption request has been approved. Emergency and definitive basis. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Brianna was the first to react, jumping to Arthur's lap with a joyful scream that woke Mikey up. Is it true? The boy asked, sleepy. Can we stay? Yes, son, Arthur responded, tears running free on his face. We can stay forever. Mary was crying and laughing at the same time, hugging Claire, who cried too. George was trying to keep his professional face on, but his smile gave him away. We still have some formalities to figure out, Regina commented, but with a smile on her face too. But it's just details now, so we don't have to run away anymore? Brianna asked, still on Arthur's lap. No, honey, we don't have to run away anymore. Can we still go see the ocean, though? Mikey asked, hopeful. Arthur laughed, a free and happy laugh that he didn't let out for a while. Of course we can. We can do whatever we want because now we are a family. Officially. Forever? Brianna insisted. Forever, he confirmed. That morning, as the sun rose over the city, illuminating the apartment where an unlikely family celebrated their official union, Arthur thought about how life took extraordinary turns. Just a few months ago, he was a solitary man, living only for work and money. Now, holding his children in his arms, with Mary smiling through tears and Claire making plans to visit as their aunt, he finally understood what Grandma Carol meant in her letter. Because in the end, it wasn't his money or social standing that saved those children. It was love. The same love that made a 5-year-old girl offer to shine shoes to feed her brother. The same love that made a sick grandmother fight to the end to protect her grandchildren. The same love that made a successful businessman discover that his true wealth wasn't in his bank account, but in the smiles of 2 children who called him Daddy. And as Brianna grabbed her old drawing pad to make a new portrait of the family, now including Claire as their aunt and, of course, Grandma Carol watching from heaven, Arthur knew he had found something that all his money could never buy, a true home, filled with love, laughter, and sometimes a few tears too. Because that's what the best families are like, not the perfect ones, but the ones who choose to stay together no matter what. And now, finally, they could be exactly that, a family, forever.